When CT-10 Optimus Prime was first revealed, most collectors treated it as a side option, not the main event, not the end game, just the affordable alternative sitting in the shadow of MN02 and Unique Toys UTR-10. But now that we finally have the full in-hand footage and transformation breakdowns, I think CT-10 has completely changed what this conversation is actually about. Because this is no longer just a question of which Optimus Prime is the most accurate. It is now a question of what collectors are actually willing to live with. And CT-10 is the first figures in this entire Bayverse masterpiece era that force that question directly. The first thing that's become obvious from in-hand impression is that CT-10 is far more complex than anyone initially expected. Currently, the transformation can be described as surprisingly dense with far more steps than anticipated, especially for a figure positioned in the budget category. One of the most impressive engineering choices is how the entire truck bed is compressed and redistributed into the torso. It is not a simple collapse or shell swap approach. It is a highly layered transformation system that actively reconstructs Optimus Prime from a relatively small truck cab into a fully proportioned robot mode. And that leads to one of the most surprising observations. The truck mode is smaller than expected. In fact, the cab is even shorter than the official NPM truck mode. And in some comparison, it appears to be smaller than the older leader class imitation as well. That immediately creates an interesting contradiction. Because on paper, a smaller truck should normally lead to a compromised robot, but CT-10 does the opposite. It somehow expands that compact vehicle into a surprisingly large, full-size robot that visually sits closer to the Black Apple proportion than many expected. That is where the engineering starts to feel almost unnatural in a good way. The transformation is essentially doing a spatial compression in reverse. Instead of hiding the robot part inside a large truck, it is building a large robot mode out of a much smaller vehicle footprint. And while that is impressive, it also introduced some concern, because several people have pointed out that the upper torso structure feels unusually delicate. The scapula and the shoulder connection in particular appear to rely on very small joints and thin structural links. Some even describe the chest and upper torso assembly as feeling like a tampon waiting to break if handled carelessly. Now to be clear, nothing in the in-hand reviews confirm actual breakage, but the concern is understandable, because the more complex a transformation becomes a compact space, the more stress point you inevitably introduce into the design. This is especially noticeable during articulation demonstration, where slight shaking of the arms movement sometimes reveals flexing of the shoulder to torso connection. However, interestingly, during the full pose sequence, the figures still hold together reasonably well, suggesting that while the design looks fragile, it may still be functionally stable under normal use. Another major talking point is the hidden wheel system. Many of us were genuinely surprised by how extensively the wheels are integrated into the transformation. Even ankle wheels and internal wheel storage system are present. This is one of those details that quietly show how far CT pushed the engineering density. However, it also fits into the broader critiques that has been appearing repeatedly across the in-hand images. And that critique is simple: the figures is overcomplicated. Not in a bad way necessarily, but in a way that makes it very different from what many people expected when they first saw the price category. This is a very important shift in perception, because earlier expectations framed CT-10 as a fun and affordable side Optimus, a figure that could transform easily, unlike MM or UT which focus more on accuracy, which we should logically expect a very hard transformation. But after seeing the full transformation process of CT-10, many collectors are now realizing that this is still a highly involved transformation experience, just on a smaller budget. That said, most of us still agree on one key point: it is impressive. Even when it's not necessarily simple, the way the robot mode emerged from the compact truck mode structure is consistently praised as clever engineering, especially considering how much mass is being redistributed. One of the most interesting design discussions comes from how CT-10 handles size philosophy. Most of us already expected this to match the Black Apple version scaling more closely in robot mode, just from the previous picture. But surprisingly, the truck is surprisingly small, much smaller than that of the Black Apple version, much shorter and more compact, and it's around the same size as the NPM4 truck mode. In fact, I even think that if we ignore MM and UT entirely, CT-10 actually makes a very strong case as a standalone modern Bayverse Optimus Prime figures, and that is a recurring theme. If MM and UT didn't exist, this would be an instant buy. That sentence appears in multiple forms across early and present. It says a lot about how perception change based on competition. Another interesting point is durability perception. Because while most of us praise the engineering, there is consistent concern about the shoulder to torso connection system. So at this stage, it remains an open question whether this is a structural issue or the handling issue. But the concern is definitely there. Now, one of the most debated topics surrounding CT-10 has been around Bailan comparison. But after seeing the full transformation footage, I firmly believe that this early assumption is wrong. Because while there are definitely some similarities in the engineering philosophy, but still most of us would not consider CT-10 to be a direct upscale of Bailan Toys Optimus Prime. Instead, there may be inspiration in certain engineering approach, but the majority of the figures appear to be independently designed, and the differences are significant enough in the torso construction, proportion handling, and transformation sequencing to separate the two clearly. So rather than a clone or upscale of Bailan toy, CT-10 seems more like a parallel evolution of similar ideas under different design constraints. CT-10 is not a simple, cheap alternative. It's a fully engineered, highly dense, and highly ambitious transformation system that just happens to exist at a lower price point. And that brings us back to the central question of this entire release. What is CT-10 actually trying to be? Because MM02 is clearly chasing perfection, UTR-10 clearly chasing premium present, but CT-10 seems to be chasing something far more practical, a full Bayverse Optimus Prime experience that does not require a premium collector budget. And that is where opinions start to split. Some collectors are extremely impressed by the engineering density and the price ratio. Others are concerned that complexity might make it less enjoyable to handle regularly. Some see it as a perfect second Optimus, others are already considering it as a potential replacement for older figures like Black Apple or LT02 depending on the final execution. And that debate is exactly why this figure is so interesting, because CT-10 is not being judged based on how good it is, it's being judged based on what kind of collectors it is for. And that is a much bigger conversation than any single future release. At this point, CT-10 has essentially become a test case for the entire Bayverse third-party market. Can a highly ambitious and highly engineered Optimus Prime still succeed when it is priced for accessibility rather than luxury? If the answer is yes, then it could reshape how future figures are designed. Not just Optimus, not just Megatron, Barricade, Ironhide, and potentially the entire Bayverse lineup moving forward.